The studio was already tense before Keanu Reeves walked onto the stage. The cameras were rolling. The audience was waiting. And across the stage sat Elon Musk, confident and relaxed, ready for a live television discussion about success, technology, and the future. Then Keanu took his seat. Nobody expected the conversation to become personal. The host smiled toward both guests. "Tonight, we have two very different people," he said. "One built companies that changed industries. The other built a career by telling stories that changed the way people see themselves." The audience applauded. Keanu smiled politely. Elon leaned back. The host continued. "Success means different things to different people. Elon, what do you think separates successful people from everyone else?" Elon answered confidently. "Persistence, intelligence, the ability to keep moving when everyone else tells you to stop." The audience applauded. Keanu listened quietly, then the host turned toward him. "Keanu, do you agree?" Keanu paused. "I agree with part of it." The host noticed the hesitation. "What part don't you agree with?" Keanu looked toward Elon. "I think persistence matters. Intelligence matters. But there's something people often forget." "What is that?" Keanu leaned slightly toward the microphone. "Who you're becoming while you're trying to win." The room became quieter. Elon raised an eyebrow. The host smiled. "That sounds philosophical." "Maybe," Keanu replied. "But I think it's practical." A few people laughed. Then Elon responded, "Sometimes you have to focus on the mission. If you spend too much time worrying about what everyone thinks, you don't accomplish anything." Keanu nodded. "I understand that. Then what's the problem?" Keanu looked at him calmly. "The problem is when people become numbers." The audience went silent. The host sensed something changing. He quickly moved to another question. "Let's talk about failure. Both of you have experienced it in very different ways. Elon, how do you deal with people criticizing your decisions?" Elon smiled. "You can't build anything important if criticism controls." Keanu listened. Then the host asked him the same question. Keanu took a breath. "I think criticism can teach you something, even when it's unfair. So especially then." The host looked surprised. Keanu continued. "When someone tells you that you're not good enough, you have two choices. You can spend your life proving them wrong, or you can ask yourself why their words hurt you." Nobody laughed this time. The camera moved closer. Keanu's expression remained calm. Then, unexpectedly, a producer handed the host a small note. The host read it. His expression changed. He looked at Keanu, then at Elon. "We have a question from someone backstage." "Who?" Keanu asked. The host hesitated. "A former employee of a major technology company." Elon frowned. "Slightly," the host continued. "She says she doesn't want her name mentioned." The audience became restless. The host looked directly at Keanu. "She says people in powerful positions sometimes forget what it feels like to be powerless." Keanu lowered his eyes. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he quietly replied, "She may be right." The host looked surprised. "Why?" Keanu looked toward the audience. "Because success can make people forget the weight of a single person's problem." The studio became completely silent. Then the host asked the question nobody expected. "Are you saying success is dangerous?" Keanu looked at Elon. "No." He paused. "I'm saying success without empathy can become dangerous." The cameras kept rolling, and suddenly, the conversation was no longer about technology. It was about people. And the most difficult question of the night had not even been asked yet. The host stared at his notes. The audience waited. Elon leaned forward. "So what would you have people do?" he asked. Keanu looked at him. "Listen." Elon smiled slightly. "Listen to what?" "To the people who don't have a microphone." The room became silent again. Keanu continued. "The person cleaning the building. The person answering customer complaints. The person who is afraid to tell their manager they're struggling. The person whose name never appears in a headline." Nobody moved. Then Elon responded, "Those problems are exactly why companies create systems." Keanu nodded. "Systems are important." Then, "People still live inside them." The audience reacted with a quiet murmur. The host looked between them. For the first time that evening, Elon seemed less certain about his answer. Then the host asked, "Keanu, you have played many characters who fight against impossible odds. Do you think people expect too much from individuals? Keanu smiled faintly. Sometimes. Why? Because we tell people to be strong without asking what made them tired. A woman in the audience began crying. The camera briefly caught her. Keanu noticed he stopped. Speaking, the host asked if he was okay. Keanu nodded. I just remembered something. What? Keanu looked toward the audience. A conversation I once imagined having with someone who felt completely forgotten. The host waited. Keanu continued. I would ask them one question. What question? Who told you that your life didn't matter? Nobody expected the answer. Keanu looked directly into the camera. Because sometimes the person who needs encouragement isn't asking for money, fame or success, he paused. They just need someone to tell them they're still worth something. The audience erupted in applause, but then something unexpected happened. A young woman suddenly stood in the back. Pro security moved toward her. She raised her hands. I'm not trying to cause trouble. The host looked concerned. What is it? The woman held up a small photograph. My father worked on a project connected to this industry, she said. Her voice trembled. He lost his job years ago. After that, he stopped believing he could start again. Keanu listened. Carefully, the woman continued. He always told me that successful people don't understand people like him. She looked toward the stage. Tonight, I wanted him to hear this. The studio became emotional. Keanu stood. The host asked, What do you want him to hear? The woman looked at Keanu. Tell him he isn't finished. Keanu didn't hesitate. He turned toward the camera. To the father watching tonight, he said, You're not finished. The audience became silent. You may have lost a job. You may have lost money. You may have lost confidence. Keanu's voice became softer, but losing one chapter doesn't mean the story is over, the woman began, crying. Then Elon slowly stood as well. He looked toward the camera. Agree with that. The audience reacted with surprise. Keanu looked at him. Elon continued. Failure can make you believe failure is who you are. He paused. It isn't. For a moment, the two men stood silently on opposite sides of the stage. Then the host asked, Keanu, you've barely spoken about yourself tonight. Why? Keanu smiled. Because the conversation was never supposed to be about me. The host looked confused. What was it supposed to be about? Keanu pointed toward the audience. The people watching who think nobody sees them. And then the host received another note. This time, he didn't read it immediately. His face turned pale. Something had happened backstage. Something connected to the woman in the audience, and when Keanu heard what it was, he walked away from the cameras. Behind the stage, the young woman was sitting alone. Her name was Emma. A producer had just told her that her father was watching the broadcast from a small apartment, hundreds of miles away. But there was more. He had heard every word, and he had called the studio. Emma covered her face. Keanu walked over and sat beside her. Is he okay? She nodded through tears. He said something I haven't heard him say in years. What? He said he wants to try again. Keanu smiled. That's a good beginning. Emma looked at him. Why did you say those things? Keanu was quiet. Because everyone needs someone to remind them that failure isn't an identity. Emma nodded. Then she asked something unexpected. Did anyone ever tell you that? Keanu looked down. Yes. Who? He smiled. Different people. At different times, he didn't explain further. The conversation had become deeply personal, but Keanu didn't want the cameras following him. He stood. Let's go back. Emma shook her head. I can't. You don't have to say anything. Then why go back? Keanu looked toward the stage. Because sometimes walking back into the room is part of being brave. They returned. The audience stood and applauded. The host looked emotional. I think tonight became something none of us expected. Keanu nodded. The host turned toward Elon. What do you think? Elon looked at the audience. I think we spend too much time measuring people by what they produce. He paused. Maybe we should also measure what they give. The audience applauded. Keanu smiled. Then the host asked, Keanu, one final question. If you could say one thing to everyone watching at home, what would it be? Keanu looked directly into the camera. The studio became completely still. Don't wait until you're successful to become kind. A long silence followed. Don't wait until you're rich to help someone. He took a breath. And don't wait until someone is gone to tell them they mattered. Several people in the audience began crying. Keanu continued, "Success is not just about how high you climb." He looked toward Elon. "It's about whether you remember the people you passed on the way up." Elon nodded quietly. Then Keanu delivered the words that silenced the entire studio. "If you have the power to make someone's life a little easier, and you choose not to, what exactly did all that success make you?" Nobody answered. The cameras remained fixed on Keanu. For several seconds, there was nothing but silence. Then the audience rose to its feet. Not because Keanu had defeated anyone, not because he had won an argument, but because he had reminded them of something simple. People matter. Later that evening, the viral clips focused on the tense exchange between Keanu and Elon. Headlines called it a debate. Some called it a confrontation. But the people who watched the entire conversation understood something different. Keanu hadn't tried to silence Elon Musk. He had tried to make room for voices that were usually unheard, and that was why his final words stayed with people long after the cameras stopped. Because sometimes the strongest person in the room isn't the one who speaks the loudest, it's the one who knows when to speak gently, the one who listens, the one who remembers that behind every number is a human being. And sometimes one honest sentence can make an entire room stop and think, not because it was powerful, but because it was true. The applause slowly faded, but nobody in the studio seemed ready to leave. Keanu remained standing beneath the bright studio lights. For a moment, he looked almost uncomfortable with the attention. The host walked toward him. "Keanu, I think you just changed the entire conversation." Keanu shook his head. No, the audience did. The host looked confused. "How?" Keanu glanced toward Emma, who was still sitting near the front. "Because they listened." That simple answer made the host pause. Then something unexpected happened. A man from the production crew walked onto the stage. He was holding a small envelope. "Excuse me," he said. The host looked surprised. "We're still live." "I know." The man turned toward Keanu. "This was delivered for you." Keanu accepted the envelope. There was no name on the front, only 3 words: "For the person who listened." Keanu slowly opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. He read the first few lines silently. His expression changed, the host noticed. "Is everything okay?" Keanu nodded, but his eyes had become slightly wet. "What does it say?" Keanu looked at the audience. "It says that someone watching tonight was about to give up on a dream." The studio became quiet. Keanu continued reading. "They said they had failed so many times that they stopped believing. They deserved another chance." He folded the letter. Then he looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this," he said, "take another chance." There was no dramatic music, no applause, just silence. Then Keanu added, "You don't need to know exactly how everything will work out." He took a breath. "You only need enough courage to take the next step." The broadcast eventually ended, but the story didn't. Clips from the conversation spread. Online, people argued about the debate. Some focused on Elon, others focused on Keanu. But thousands of comments shared something else. Stories people talked about losing jobs, starting over, being rejected, feeling invisible, being afraid to try again. And one comment stood out. It came from Emma's father. He wrote that he had spent years believing his best days were behind him. Then he said something nobody expected. The next morning, he updated his old resume. He sent it to 3 companies. One rejected him, the second never replied, but the third called. It wasn't his dream job. It wasn't a huge salary. It wasn't the kind of opportunity people would celebrate on television, but it was a beginning. Emma later told the story to Keanu. He smiled. "That sounds like success to me," she laughed. "Really?" "Absolutely. But he didn't become rich." Keanu shook his head. "Success isn't always getting more." He looked at her. "Sometimes it's becoming willing to try again." Months later, the television network invited Keanu back. The host asked him whether he regretted the controversial conversation. Keanu smiled. "No, not even the part that became a headline." Keanu laughed quietly. "Headlines disappear. What doesn't?" Keanu thought for a moment. "How you treat people. The host nodded, then he asked, "If you could go back to that night, would you say anything differently?" Keanu looked toward the empty studio. "Yes." "What?" "I would say it sooner." The host smiled. "What would you say?" Keanu looked into the camera. "You matter before you succeed." He paused. "You matter after you fail." Another pause. "And you matter when nobody is watching." The studio became quiet. Keanu continued, "So don't measure your life only by what the world applauds." He smiled. Gently. "Sometimes the most important victories happen in silence," and that became the final lesson of the night. Not a lesson about fame, not a lesson about money, not even a lesson about winning an argument. It was a lesson about humanity, because the world will always have people competing to be louder, richer, faster, and more successful. But there will always be another kind of person, too, someone who notices the person standing alone, someone who listens when everyone else is talking, someone who gives hope without asking for anything in return. And sometimes that person can change an entire room without raising their voice. That was what made Keanu's words unforgettable. Didn't silence someone by shouting. He silenced the room by making everyone think. And when the cameras finally turned off, the most important part of the story was no longer happening on television. It was happening in homes, in quiet bedrooms, at kitchen tables, inside the minds of people who had almost convinced themselves that their story was over. For some of them, that night became a beginning. And perhaps that is the greatest kind of influence anyone can have. Not making people afraid of you, not making people admire you, but making someone believe in themselves again.